Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In today's special episode, we sat down with two guests, Casey Fleming, CEO of BlackOps Partners Corporation on cybersecurity, and former counterterrorism officer Drew Berquist, who also hosts his own show. They touch on the changing landscape of counterterrorism, from what we learned in the 20 years in Afghanistan to how that will affect adversaries like the Chinese Communist Party going forward. Let's dig in. Thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So recently, with the passing of the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and with the last troops leaving Afghanistan, there seems to be a change in the way counterterrorism is conducted because there are no longer boots on the ground. So some are mentioning now it's more remote, such as through drones or cyber. So what's your take on that?
I see that's the only option. If you don't have boots on the ground, you have to resort to other methods and other means that you have, which, as you mentioned, are drones and cyber tactics as well. So that's the natural progression. It gives us a wider span of coverage, but at the same time, it doesn't give us the effectiveness of actually having boots on the ground. So it's going to be limited in its strikes and its effectiveness, but it still can be very effective. But again, boots, there's no substitute, in my opinion, for boots on the ground.
Well, it's for one, it's very difficult. Certainly it's changing, and it's changing because it has to. But all of these things, and we've seen it in countless different examples, whether it's battling ISIS in Iraq and Syria or what have you, is when you just take one component and try to focus on that, be it drones in this case or whatever, fill in the blank, it becomes very difficult because you need all those pieces playing together. So certainly there's a lot of talk right now about over-the-horizon capabilities, and we can do this and we can do it from afar even though we're not there. But it's really not that simple. You can, assuming that Russia and China don't create some new rules with the Taliban in terms of the airspace in Afghanistan, if all goes as planned, you can have drones flying there. You've got that kinetic capability, but your success rate and the probability of having things go the way you want them to goes significantly down without boots on the ground.
Right, and as you mentioned, airspace, and some have raised the concern that to even get drones into Afghanistan now, since we don't have a presence there, we would have to fly them through, say, Pakistan, and we'd first need consent from Pakistan to even get it there. So how do you see that playing out?
I think it's going to be tricky. Look, I mean, there's routes, there's ingress routes that you can do, there's partnerships that you can do. We've long made these deals with neighboring countries to allow passage, and be in their airspace. But it's going to be everything has been flipped on its head. It's very complicated. The power players in Afghanistan now are not the Americans. The power players in Pakistan, to a large extent, are not the Americans. Not that we were always the only ones there, but the voices are changing. Who's coming to the table is changing. And with that, there's a cascading that's going to happen, and it's going to have a ripple effect in a lot of areas. And we really are going to be a lot more blind as to what's happening there, and our capabilities are going to be significantly diminished. That's
actually very true. They're all sovereign countries, and we have to have permission to go fly in or fly over their countries. So that's something that has to be worked out with each one of those countries, and that's where it gets very complex as we go forward.
So with the 20 years of our presence there, what do you think we learned in that time?
Oh man, how long do we have? It's a very complicated country. Anyone who's I spent over 30 deployments there, most of my adult life in that country, with great colleagues and patriots, and you learn just how complicated it is. You learn how committed and radical the people of Afghanistan are great, but how radical and extreme the extremists actually are, whether it's Al-Qaeda, ISIS-K, the Taliban, the Haqqani faction of the Taliban. There's so many groups roaming around there, and you learn how committed they are to their ideology and how much they despise the West and Americans in particular, and just how difficult it is to accomplish anything there. So you learn a lot about that from an operational standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, but you also learn that, hey, we've done this again. We as a country got into nation building. It never works. It never goes the way you want, particularly in this part of the world. And it just shows how when we first got into Afghanistan, things were going very well. We had a very clear and defined mission. We were executing that mission very well. We accomplished that mission. And then as things scaled into more of a nation building type platform or plan, things got out of control because there was a lot of confusion and muddying of the waters when it came to the mission. So it's a complicated country, and we overcomplicate our plans, and that's just a recipe for disaster.
Actually, not much changed. I think we learned a lot from that type of war that we weren't really experienced in before. Our conventional warfare, which is we always fight the next war with last war's technology and methods, and I think it's really it really woke us up from a military and a government perspective that these are new tactics to us, certainly not to the Afghan issues like the Taliban and ISIS and Al Qaeda and so on. So I think we've learned the methods of our adversaries, and so that was an education for us. I don't think we learned much more from anything other than the tactics that they used that were completely different than the tactics that we brought to the table at the time. I think we also learned that it was a forever war. And as they say that, it's the battlefield or the graveyard of dynasties. We could have learned from our predecessors that it was not a fruitful place to have a war.
So now there are some concerns that Afghanistan can become a safe haven for terrorists. So what's your take on that?
Absolutely. I mean, Afghanistan is more dangerous right now than it was pre-9/11. We've given the Taliban more power than they've ever had, more territory than they've ever had, more money than they've ever had, more equipment than they've ever had. And we're also kind of recognizing them, whether the government's going to outright say that or not. We're essentially recognizing them as legitimate, giving them additional aid. There's reports of additional $64 million in humanitarian aid, which will never go to its intended recipients this week. So we've really created a very, very dangerous situation. And to think that there's not a lot of people in that country now, there's 19 provinces that have al-Qaeda training camps already. ISIS-K, obviously, there. The Haqqanis have been there, will continue to be there. To think that that's not going to bite people in the West and possibly us is foolhardy. It's not a smart plan.
And some have mentioned that we still have, I mean, aside from Americans, we also have foreign interpreters and allies in the country. So how do you see that as playing out?
Well, it's been a point of big frustration for us. We've got 2 decades of warfighters who have been fighting the global war on terror there. We've established some extremely powerful and strong relationships with our Afghan partners. Again, some of them we've known more than we've known friends and family back here in our adult lives. So it's a very difficult situation to see how our government has not only abandoned them, but then gotten in the way of efforts to help evacuate them. Has been extremely frustrating. It's been very encouraging to see all of the former warfighters, patriots, now civilians standing up, trying to leverage contacts, resources, networks to get people out. We've had success doing some of that, but I don't see it going well. I know of several who have been killed already because of their, ties with us. I know more that are being actively hunted, and they're all running for their lives. So it's not going to end well. It hurts our relationship moving forward. These people who are on the run know that they can trust their advisors and the soldiers or intel operators that they worked with, but they know now that they can't trust the American government, and that makes things tricky moving forward. And again, our hope at this point for those who are working on these initiatives on the side is just that we can get as many out as we can, since the government's not.
And so lately, the Chinese Communist Party has had very friendly relations with the Taliban, but it also seems almost in a way the relationship is where each side is in it for themselves. The Taliban need funding because they've lost access to money, and the Chinese Communist Party wants both security against the Xinjiang terrorists they imagine breaking out, but also maybe access to, say, rare earth minerals. So how concerning do you think this relationship is?
I think it's extremely concerning. What you just described is a perfect relationship. You have a need on one side and a want on the other, and it's being fulfilled by the other party. And it's that way with the Chinese Communist Party, and it's that way with the Taliban. So it's a match made in not the right places, if you will. If you're looking for peace on the planet, if you're looking for everybody getting along, that's not what you're looking for. So it's a very strong partnership because Taliban needs the money, and the Taliban has what the Chinese Communist Party needs. They want rare earth minerals, they want technology, they want support for the Belt Road Initiative, those kind of things. So it's a very devastating partnership to world peace.
Well, I think it's going to be really. I'm very curious to see. Obviously, China has been more involved across the border in Pakistan. They have great interest in Afghanistan with the mineral rights, whether it's lithium or rare earths, you name it. That's their MO. They love to go and get that stuff all out. So, and then of course they share a border, albeit a smaller chunk. They share a border with Afghanistan. So there's lots of strategic interest for them. They also love to see us look bad and weak and withdraw and kind of take us down a notch as they try to catch up to us. So there's lots of big wins for them. I'm very curious. Obviously, they have plans to remain in contact with the Taliban, remain with some presence there, as do other countries. So how that relationship unfolds is TBD, but I think it's going to be very advantageous for the Chinese. And again, they're going to mostly win there. We're going to lose. And I don't think that what's going to be interesting, I'm curious to see this, is how they tamp down or don't on the extremist behavior. Obviously, there's going to be some backroom deals for, hey, this is what we want. This is what we want to accomplish here. We want these minerals. We want these rights. We will help you with this, and we will help you with that. We also want to ensure that our border stays secure. But the next step is going to be, do they actually say it's not okay what you're doing to your citizens, which I don't think they'll clamp down too much on that, and it's not okay that you're going and conducting these attacks and creating these safe havens for other extremists to come in and plan, attacks, whether they're in country, out of country, or what have you.
And now some have been saying that the Chinese Communist Party has been basically waging war against the U.S., kind of behind the scenes, because critics are saying with the trillions of dollars we poured into Afghanistan and the 20 years of focusing there, it has allowed adversaries, particularly China, to catch up. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, look, America's really focused on the shiny ball. We always have been. It's been a problem of ours. We focus on Afghanistan, then we put some more emphasis and focus on Iraq, then we come back here. But we're always just focusing on one or two big things and pouring tons of resources into it. So they are able to catch up. They're able to spread out and strategically make gains in lots of areas. And then, to your point on them interfering and kind of being behind the scenes, China and Russia have both been very involved in Afghanistan over the last couple decades, and particularly more in recent times for China. But they have been there. They have been doing everything they can to undermine the United States, again, because they want to take us out of that position. They want us to look bad. They have done lots to support the Afghan government, our enemies there, and then as well as try and get everything that they in particular want out of the region as well. So they've been very involved behind the scenes. There's just not much talk about it.
Just look at the history. Okay, look at when somebody says, hey, don't follow their words, follow their actions. Back in 2001, this was 20 years ago, look up the Hainan Island incident. A U.S. Navy plane was flying in international waters off of Hainan Island in China, and a Chinese fighter pilot forced them down to land on Hainan Island. So what they did was they forced the crew into jail for, I think it was probably 10 days, but they basically blueprinted the aircraft, took the next, I forget what it is, the actual number, but I think it was probably 30 days that the Chinese Communist Party blueprinted that spy aircraft, that surveillance aircraft from the U.S. Navy. And then you remember Osama bin Laden. We had an aircraft, we had a helicopter that crashed inside the compound, and it was a stealth helicopter. And immediately the Pakistanis sold that to the Chinese Communist Party. So the Chinese Communist Party has an extreme thirst for technology. And, you're seeing that the history of how they've reacted, they can't get their hands on our technology fast enough, not just stealing intellectual property from insider spies in U.S. companies and defense companies and U.S. government. They're also very quick to soak up the technology that they can get through adversaries and through, our deployments, for example, as you mentioned, in Afghanistan. So there's a tremendous thirst for technology. You can bet, it's my opinion, you can bet that a lot of that technology that was left on the ground in Afghanistan is already on its way to China with a nice payment to the Taliban and whoever else, whether it's ISIS, whoever else has control of some of those assets. And from our understanding, there's quite a list of assets that were left on the ground. And those assets are our intellectual property and our technology that the taxpayers paid for. So that's something that's very concerning. Back to you.
Some are also mentioning that we are currently in a so-called Cold War with China, and that, say, in terms of a war, America would still be using Cold War tactics to kind of defend or, so how do you see that as playing out?
Well, for those folks that say that this is another Cold War or Cold War II, they couldn't be more accurate and more correct. However, it's much worse than what they are saying. It's the textbook term is called unrestricted hybrid warfare. And what that means is achieving military methods or military objectives through non-military means. And what that also, another description of that is basically the Chinese Communist Party. And I explained to people that there's only one China, and it is completely controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. So if you're doing business with China or buying products made in China or investing in China, you're doing business directly with the Chinese Communist Party. And so you've got a communist regime that is in direct adversarial competition. They say it's war. If you talk to the Chinese Communist Party and if you study the Chinese Communist Party, they claim that it's war against the United States and the West, which of course is war against democracy, freedom, and everything that we stand for. So it's unrestricted hybrid warfare. That's what people need to understand. The Chinese Communist Party believes that if it ever goes to conventional warfare, that they have failed on over 100 different methods of unrestricted hybrid warfare. Again, everything short of conventional warfare to weaken the United States and all of our Western allies. So to weaken us, again, they're playing the very long game to basically their take is just to walk on and take us over. So that's what people need to understand. So absolutely, there's a Cold War, but it's much worse than you can possibly imagine. It's been going on for decades with the Chinese Communist Party. It goes back all the way to 1986, month number 3, which is their program 863. And I'll paraphrase it for you. It's basically, we're going to lie, cheat, and steal and do whatever we have to do to take over the United States and the Western world.
And so going back to the more remote means of warfare, some have been drawing comparisons with the Chinese Communist Party, saying if we were to go to war, it would be through more remote means, saying they've already launched several attacks against us, whether it's stealing trade secrets or talent or attacking us through ransom. So how do you see that playing out?
Well, I think it's playing out now. I think it's been playing out. I think that we're in a Cold War of sorts with China. I think that we never really truly, even though we said we ended the one with Russia, never really ended that one. We've kind of got two concurrent and parallel, quiet, no bullets being fired wars with both of those, big state actors, and China in particular, who's been so aggressive with everything you just listed and mentioned there, and they never quit. They never quit. So I think that it's going to be a lot more of that. Neither side wants an all-out battle. I think that's clear. Doesn't mean that it's never going to happen. I hope, God forbid, it does not. But it's going to be a lot more. And I think you're going to see increased efforts, and particularly right now, increased efforts by the Chinese, because they're emboldened. They see America retreating. They see America as weak right now. And it's hard to argue that we're not. So people are going to capitalize on that. And I think Putin will, too, and get as much done in the next several years as they can.
And speaking of the Cold War, some are saying we're still using Cold War strategies, especially, say, in the nuclear arms race, because now it's China instead of Russia that we're competing with. And so some people are raising the concern that the efforts we're using now are the same as in the Cold War, such as stockpiling nukes. But some are saying the way forward would be it'd be different. It'd be through cyber, as in dismantling the nukes in the air. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think, well, for one, there's lots of areas where we are dated, where our foes are getting more aggressive and taking new tactics, and or just using more tactics and not being stuck in a couple lanes, if you will. But I definitely think that's a huge frontier. It's been, and it's going to only grow and expand the cyber element of it. And it's a way that people can be less deliberate, or more deliberate, but less obvious with their attacks. And again, kind of in keeping with that Cold War. So I definitely see that. I think it's going to be very traditional, kind of cat and mouse intelligence and espionage operations that have been happening, will always happen. And it's going to be interwoven with that new front of cyber, because it's such an important piece, and technology is a huge component of what we're all battling over. Who can be on top? Yes, you want to have more nuclear weapons, but yes, you also want to have that new shiny toy. You want to have that new technology that nobody else has. So that's going to be a huge part of it.
And is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I would just I would just say that it's going to be very interesting to see how all our administration, the Chinese, the Russians, and how all of this works in Afghanistan. And again, my hope is, look, if we're lucky, China obviously has their reasons to be there. They stabilize the region. They tamp down the terrorism and extremism because they want their people safe to get the stuff out, and that benefits everybody. We still look weak. We still withdrew in a horrible way. It couldn't have gone any more poorly. But if we're lucky, we see the Chinese step up and do the right thing. I'm just not sure that they will.
So going forward, what can the U.S. and its allies do to kind of combat that?
I've been doing this for over a decade, and I do this every day, 7 days a week for over a decade. And so somebody who's been in this chair for a long time and at the tip of the spear, I'll tell you what my opinion is after studying it for so long. I think that the free world is going to be forced very soon and very quickly to all work together in an alliance and in a partnership. Those democracy, freedom-loving, peaceful-loving countries are going to have to create an alliance, much like we did in World War II, but it's an alliance against Chinese communism, because if all you have to do is follow the intelligence, the Chinese Communist Party, the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans have all formed a pact over the past 3 or 4 years. They all share military exercises, some military technology, against what? Against the free world and democracy. So they're organized in a very dark axis against freedom and peaceful nations, and they're self-serving. And at some point, I'm sure that they will divert to their own countries to what they need to do. But right now, they're in a very strong alliance doing global war game and warfare exercises together and sharing those technologies, those processes, technologies, processes, and military know-how between them. Again, so who's the enemy? The enemy is the free world. Number one, the United States, and then all of our allies that are in the free world with us. So I think that to summarize, I believe what there needs to be is an alliance, a trade alliance, a military alliance, all those things, because trust me, the Chinese Communist Party, Iran, North Korea, and Russia have all partnered together. So when we wake up and we really see the fog clearing, I think there's going to be no other choice but to create the same kind of alliance for the free world.
And so from a civilian level, is there anything, say, the average Joe at home can do to kind of try and stem this?
Stay informed, vote for those leaders, your local leaders, your state leaders, your federal leaders. Put people in these offices that are going to change and defend freedom, because I will assure you, a lot of the people that are in office today are not the people that they're on the take with the Chinese Communist Party. Some of them are, many of them are. So you've got to follow the money. You got to follow the rhetoric, and put those people that are going to be in there to defend you, local, state, and federal, all those levels. Pay attention to elections and put those people in that are going to defend your freedom, your children's future, because I assure you, it's not happening now. We don't have a lot of the right people in the offices and so on. What you're seeing in the media right now is really the Chinese Communist Party influencing our society. 85% of social media is done through cognitive warfare, which is also information warfare. There's electronic bots, in other words, software bots that are out there creating accounts and putting left against right, blue against red, straights against gays, and so on. And we're Americans. We're all in this together. We all have the same values when it boils it down. But the media and social media would have you believe that it's really, really bad. And it can be. If this continues for 2 or 3 more years, it can get really, really bad. Understand that what's happening is what you're seeing in technology is it's being used against you and your family and your values. One other point I'll make. Any technology coming out of China, Zoom, Bicells, ZTE, Huawei. I mean, there's a list of technologies. TikTok. You have to assume that that technology is weaponized against you, your family, your company, and your country. Assume that any technology, I'm talking appliances, any technology coming out of China is weaponized against you and your family and your company and your values, to put you out of business, whether it's your company or whether it's your family, to put you out of business. So again, for somebody that's been doing this over a decade, consider me your brother that's coming back from the front, and I'm reporting back to you in this broadcast today.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
And for those just tuning in, that was today's special episode with Casey Fleming, CEO of BlackOps Partners Corporation, and former counterterrorism officer Drew Berquist, who also hosts his own show. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.